welcome back to the channel. My name is Muriel, and in this video I will be going over my top 10 favorite works of fantasy fiction of all time. As with my science fiction list, I first went through my fantasy fiction favorites in 2021, but I have since then acquired new ones and decided this list also needed an update. A few reminders before I start. As with the previous list, I used the word work here and not novel because I don't just consider standalone novels for favorite status. Feeling super confident about all-time favorites also becomes a lot more difficult for me past the 3rd to 5th places because, quite simply, I feel less strongly about them. Everything cited on this list will have an 8 out of 10 rating at minimum. Additionally, an extra quick reminder that I separate the art quite sharply from the artist, and I am thus not interested in discussing here the problematic aspects of some of the writers on my favorites lists. Finally, all the works I will be mentioning, barring the one in 10th place, have dedicated book reviews on my channel. You are welcome to check out if you feel so inclined. This time around, my number 10 is Philip Pullman's The Secret Commonwealth. As a novel on its own, but also, if I'm being perfectly honest here, as a part of the broader The Book of Dust / His Dark Materials series. This is undoubtedly the shakiest entry on my list, as The Book of Dust yet remains an incompleted trilogy, though apparently book 3 should be coming out this year, I think. Still, The Secret Commonwealth is currently my favorite book in the extended His Dark Materials series, a favorite of my childhood, as a reminder, and it was a highly surprising 8 out of 10 read to boot. I was thoroughly taken in by young adult Lyra. Really enjoyed the way Philip Pullman has expanded his original universe, one parallel to ours, and, most importantly, the way he has deepened his theming on consciousness through demons. The element of his world building I definitely love the most. I mean, come on, who doesn't love the His Dark Materials demons, for real? My number 9 is Robert Holstock's Lavondis, the second entry in his Mythago Wood series. And yes, I've also read book 1, Mythago Wood, but not any of the following volumes. Mythago Wood, and thus Lavondis, are stories that revolve around an imaginary swathe of primeval English forest that, to put it simply, physically manifests human archetypes. Both novels were extremely atmospheric reads for me, dripping as they were with earthy, sensual as in of the 5 senses, old-growth forest, and, broadly speaking, pagan imagery. My preference goes to Lavondis because it centers on a female character named Talis, who essentially becomes a shaman, and because it really commits to its thematic exploration of archetypes and, in relationship to this, humankind's archaic relationship to the spirit of the land. My number 8 is Patricia A. McKillip's The Forgotten Beasts of Eld, a relatively short, as you can see, but quietly magical and quietly powerful tale I first read in 2020. We're still in the lower tiers of the list here, so this is obviously not as visceral of a favorite, but this story and its main character have just stuck with me. Something about its, what I'll call prose melodies, reminded me of Ursula K. Le Guin's writing and of The Mists of Avalon a tiny bit, but more on that later in the list. And I found this oddly touching, even soothing, I suppose, in a way. I also related quite strongly to Sibel herself, the main character, and it is still true that when I imagine having a quiet place of my own to share with another soul, were I to be so lucky, I imagine something akin to Sibel's forest abode. Yes, where she spends her days studying magic and the arcane mysteries of the universe, surrounded by her loyal beast companions. I'm going to have to cheat a little for my number 7, or rather, number 7s, as I couldn't really decide between China Miéville's Kraken and his new Crobuzon trilogy. This is book 1, Perdido Street Station. Whilst I technically rated the former a bit higher, I have to acknowledge how blown away I was with the latter and its deliciously imaginative world building. Miéville's theming is, of course, always a delight to dive into as well, and I always enjoy his high caliber but oh so playful prose. Kraken plays around with a wackily magical and wildly cult-infested London. New Crobuzon is Miéville's take on the weird, city-state character, is what I call it, and is filled with uniquely bizarre magic, Xenians, the Remade, dream-stealing slake moths, and trans-dimensional spider and whale-like entities. Oh my! I just can't choose one over the other, sue me. I'll also award an honorary mention to Jeff Vandermeer's Ambergris trilogy, since it's his take on the weird city-state character, and I did thoroughly enjoy it, especially Volume 2, Shriek and Afterward, but I guess my preference still goes to Mievel's writing here. My number 6 is a newcomer to the list, and it is Lev Grossman's The Magicians, as a standalone. Though, I basically just finished book 2 and loved it as well, so I guess it could kind of stand in for the first 2 books in the Magicians trilogy. I'm not sure yet, but at least this, I first read it last year and did not at all expect it to become a new favorite. It is a novel I had known of for a while. I'd even previously watched a few episodes of the TV adaptation, but I never thought I would actually read until my ex recommended I give it a go, and I was really taken in by the story's main character, Quentin Coldwater, though now having read book 2, I'm kind of literally in love with Julia, so make of that what you will. And through him, I was really taken in by the book's thematic exploration of clinical depression in a fantasy setting. Beyond that, I also enjoyed following a cast of, broadly speaking, atypical / neurodivergent kind of and intellectually gifted characters in a vividly portrayed, both dark and whimsical fantasy setting that featured numerous playful allusions to works such as Harry Potter or the Chronicles of Narnia, and this very much continues in book 2, which is part of the reason why I loved it as well. My number 5 is Jen Williams' The Winnowing Flame trilogy. Here I am holding up book 1 in the trilogy, The Ninth Reign, an unexpectedly gripping, enjoyable, and moving story that blends so many classical elements of the subgenre of epic fantasy with, dashes of science fantasy and horror here and there in refreshingly new ways. I love the world of Sarn, its fantastical beasts and giant riding bats, oh yes, and the story's main cast of characters. No small feat for a reader who is not primarily character-driven, and I just love the found family in this as well. Now, The Winnowing Flame is, in all honesty, a less theming-rich or theming-heavy work of SFF overall, especially compared to several or even most of my other favorites in both the science fiction and fantasy, but it had so much heart and unique flavor that I couldn't put it down on my first read through. And as of now, I can't but acknowledge that by, well, retaining it on this list as my number 5. As it was last time, my number 4 is none other than J.R.R. Tolkien's Legendarium, with my favorite part of it still being, yes, the Silmarillion. I know, it's a little boring to see yet another SFF nerd site, The Legendarium, as a personal favorite, but what can I say? I'm a sucker for good world building, deep theming, and, well, The Legendarium just freaking delivers on both fronts, especially the former. And yes, over the actual stories and characters for me personally, at least when it comes to The Lord of the Rings. I know, perhaps a slightly unpopular opinion there. Tolkien's work was a labor of creative love that draws on rich mythological and theological soil, and it shows in the best way. Beleriand, Numenor, Middle-earth, one can't help but get lost in the beautifully, meticulously crafted secondary world of Arda, and I myself am no exception in that regard. My number 3 is another shining, glorious newcomer to the list, and it is Kira Jane Buxton's Hollow Kingdom. This novel follows a plucky American crow named ST and his canine companion Dennis as they try to survive in the wake of an apocalyptic, human-hitting plague. And I'll admit, it barely qualifies as fantasy, but it also focuses entirely on animal characters and their beautifully variegated points of view, so fantasy it is in my weirdo book. It's no secret to my regulars that I am a great lover of corvids, and ST is no small part of the reason why I love this novel so freaking much. But I must also praise Kira Jane Buxton's uniquely textured and scintillating prose, and the novel's deeply moving and spiritually significant theming centered on community, identity, love with a capital L, nature with a capital N, humanity, and the interconnected web of life that binds us all together. This was just a huge, a wonderful punch to the heart. And what's more, good news, the sequel to Hollow Kingdom, Feral Creatures, is very good as well and most definitely worth your while. My number 2 and number 1 fantasy series firmly remains G.R.R. Martin's A Song of Ice and Fire. I know, it's also pretty boring, but look, I love me some Targaryens, or rather Dany and her dragons. I love the ambitious world building, the political intrigue, the slowly mounting but potentially world-ending magical stakes, intertwining plot threads, the rich and beautifully nuanced character work, and the theming centered on the impact of war, faith, socio-political change, and even gender, actually, on individuals and society. The latter is surprisingly well done for a piece of fiction that I would not otherwise consider feminist, right? This is a series I've now read 3 times, that I'm terribly sad we don't have an ending to, but that I continue and will continue to love nonetheless. And I hold up a feast for crows because she gets too much hate in the fandom, so you know what, I want to promote her. She's very good as well if you really take the time to read it through the lens of anti-war theming and the intricacies of the character plotlines, etc. So give her some love, she deserves it too. My number 1 favorite fantasy standalone of all time has still not been dethroned and thus remains M.Z. Bradley's The Mists of Avalon. This is a chunky, sprawling, and detailed female-centric and properly feminist retelling of the Arthurian legend, or Arthurian mythos as I like to call it as well, featuring Morgaine, or Morgaine Le Fay, as the story's main character. The retelling essentially follows her life and offers deep character studies, immersive world-building that blends the magical and the historical, haunting scenes, thoughtful writing, and very rich theming that looks at the relationships between men and women, patriarchy or androcracy, power, faith and religion, the inevitable melancholy passing of ages, and hope in the face of it all. I shed rivers of tears both times I finished this 1,000-page epic. I also shed rivers of tears when I finished Hollow Kingdom, as an FYI. And The Mists of Avalon remains the most spiritually impactful piece of fiction I've ever read. Closely followed by Hollow Kingdom, but this is still most definitely my number 1. So there you have all of my fantasy fiction favorites of all time. I hope you found this video interesting and engaging. If you wish to discuss or leave a comment about any of the books I've mentioned, please feel free to do so. And on that note, I hope you all have a lovely day, evening, or whichever time of day you prefer. Do take good care of yourselves. Thank you for the continued support, and I shall see you all very soon in another video. But until then, bye-bye.